one of the things that I was looking at is I remember this. I remember you coming in to NASCAR. And I remember thinking about it back then about how quick you went through the ranks to the Cup Series. It probably didn't feel quick to you.
Nope, not
right?
at all.
Probably felt like it took forever, right? Because you're like grinding through every second, right? Trying to make sure you're doing what you need to do. But in front of everyone else, it's like, man, you got the Busch opportunity in a very quick part, and then that turned into a Cup opportunity really quickly because you got in that Busch car for Bruco, and that's the first car you drove in the Busch Series, right? Ran really good.
Was that the Williams Travel Center?
Yeah, 2 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I raced you one particular time at Richmond.
Oh, yeah.
Like crazy.
Dirtied me. I remember.
What?
I'm kidding.
OCD, if you dirtied him, he remembers it.
I'm kidding. No.
I had the Gossamer car.
The what?
The Gossamer car.
What's that?
The Looney Tunes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And my car was freaking
Super
ridiculous,
fast.
right?
Yeah.
And we had a mid-race restart, and he's running really good, running second. And I got the green flag, and we go down into 1 and 2. And, I mean, he's on my door for like 3 laps. And I finally had to back up, and he leads. And I'm like, shit. Like, I thought I was just going to go on by him and drive away, right? The car had been that good all night. And I'm like, damn. I had to back up and kind of like regroup and then try to pass him again, not knowing whether I was really going to get it done or not.
So I think it's really funny that you think that happened fast, because my first year of Busch for Bruco was the year your dad was killed at Daytona, and I felt like everyone at Bruco thought I was scared after that. And I say that because you remember all the headrests that came out like shortly after that, and seatbelts and Hans device, like all this stuff came out, and I wanted all of it. And it wasn't because I was scared. I just wanted to be safe, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I was kind of adamant, and I wanted it in every car, not just. At one time we're like, oh, well, we'll just put it in the super speedway cars. We won't worry about short. I'm like, no, I want this in every car, right? Yeah. And I wasn't having the success. And I remember they're like, he must be scared. And I'm like, man, my career is going to be over before it ever starts, Fortunately, I did just well enough as that year went on to kind of get to stay there for another year. And then the following year, I had a little bit more success. It was so much, I don't want to say harder, because I don't think that's fair to guys in the Xfinity Series now. But man, when they had 20 Cup guys in all those Busch races, it just was different.
Yeah.
I mean, you could run 30th and maybe be the best normal Busch guy, right?
Yeah.
Like Jeff Green would always run up front, but man, it was different then.
Yeah, we go to Charlotte, there'd be 17 or 20 Cup guys, and there'd be 2 regulars in the top 20.
It's unbelievable.
It was wild.
Yeah, and it's another thing that was like, I didn't think it was ever fair, is that all the Cup guys got in better cars.
Yeah.
Like, they got to get in all the like Cup-backed cars on top of them being better drivers,
Yeah, that conversation comes around every year, and was my opinion, is like, so Kyle Busch, right? He's an amazing race car driver, one of the best, right? Won most of his races driving the Gibbs cars, which are great race cars. Right. And that year where he drove his own cars, he looked regular. Normal.
That's right, I know.
And it really drove home the fact for me, like, I would, if they want to take the limits and the restrictions away, great. But all these guys need to just start their own teams.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if they do have that access, and like we do with Hendrick, start your own team, run it all out of your own shop.
Right. It's a lot different.
It is different.
It's a lot different, yeah, for sure.
Help me recollect something from that time, because I have a bit of a vantage point, being that my first year was 2002, and I was with James Finch's team. And I remember you coming in. I remember you running that Williams travel car, but then at some point you're at Ganassi, or you're also running for Finch. I also remember there being some sort of turmoil between Finch and Jimmy Spencer, that ultimately led him. I mean, and obviously Chip Ganassi. What do you remember, and how did you end up? Because you were running that Finch car the next year, I believe.
Yeah, so I ran for Bruco in 01, 02. And then when I left Bruco, that's when I went to Ganassi in 03. So that would be the first year that I ran for Finch, would be 03.
Because then there was an affiliation between Chip and James Finch.
Yeah,
I believe there's some.
Well, I think that initially it was that Jimmy drove for Finch and Ganassi.
That's
Remember,
right.
he was in the Target car. I'm kind of
That's
remembering
right.
this with you.
Yeah.
But they also became partners
became partners
some land.
somehow.
And they were friends, right? I mean, like that's I
Right.
think more than anything, they were just they were friends. Yeah.
And then when they cut Jimmy loose, they being Chip and Finch,
Right.
You were now an employee of Chip Ganassi Racing, and so therefore you probably just kind of naturally ended up running that yellow transportation car a couple times. Is that right?
I ran it a lot.
Oh, you ran it.
I think I ran.
I remember you winning
it.
it.
I mean, I remember I probably ran 25
Oh,
Busch
wow.
races a year
It was
for
that
the
many.
first 4 or 5 years of my Cup career. I ran every companion race. Is what I remember. Like,
Yeah.
But that was normal. Everybody did.
That was the same
Actually,
type
it
of
wasn't
schedule.
normal. Jeff Gordon didn't do it. Like there was when I first came in, and you would remember this. Like it wasn't cool to go run Busch. Like Jeff Gordon's not running Busch. Like he
Right.
ran like one every 4 or 5 years or something. So, but when you were new, it was experience, and the cars. I feel like they related more than what clearly than what they would now. But at the time, I mean, that's just what everybody did. And then it was almost like I don't know if it would have been Kyle Busch, maybe Kevin Harvick. Some of those guys then made it cool to like go back and run Busch and do both of them.
Yeah, I remember Jeff coming and running 5 races in the Pepsi car in '99, and I was like, hell yes!
Oh, I know. That was the
I was
coolest
so
thing
damn
ever.
pumped up, and he came down there and he's like, these things drive like shit. I'm not doing this. I'm not gonna do this. After this 5 races is up, I'm going back to my Cup car. This
so
isn't
good.
fun at all. He won Phoenix, but didn't want to drive anymore after that. So you get into you at Ganassi, you're supposed to go drive this 42 car full time, but then Sterling gets hurt. Sterling's leading the points. Like Sterling's got a legit shot in the twilight of his career at winning a championship. And we talked about it on the show here where he broke his neck in Kansas. They put you in the car, your first race, Talladega. I don't remember much about that, or maybe you don't either, but the second race at Charlotte, you win.
Yeah, so what I remember about all of that is that I was supposed to run my first race, not for Ganassi, but for Melling Racing. And Chad Knaus was the crew chief. Stacy Compton. Remember that?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember, they sat on the pole at every because they had like this truck arm mechanism that was way cheated up.
Yeah.
And I was so excited. I'm like, I can't wait to drive that thing at Talladega because I know we're gonna be on the pole. I'm like, I don't think I've ever had a pole in the Busch Series. I'm gonna have a pole in the damn Cup Series my first race because I'm getting in that car. So I was supposed to drive that car, and Haviland, I believe, was gonna sponsor it. It's a little foggy, and Sterling gets hurt. And Andy Graves called me in his office, and he's like, listen, he said, we think if you're good enough to drive our car next year, we want you to drive the 40 car. I believe it was a week-to-week basis at the time. I don't think we were sharing how hurt Sterling really was. And I just was like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's incredible opportunity, but I was also really nervous. Like I got to be honest, I had a motorhome for the first time in Talladega, that first Cup race. And I had a girlfriend staying with me in that motorhome. And if you've ever stayed in a motorhome, you know the walls are pretty thin and there's just not a lot of room. And I spent, I bet, 75% of the weekend in the Porta-John next to my motorhome because I was so nervous. Like
Jeez.
My nerves were, I wasn't scared. I just wanted to do well. And I knew that I was in a good car. And the thing is, for me, when I was at Bruco, even though Casey Atwood had won a couple of races in that car, the expectations weren't we're going to win every single weekend, right? It was like good cars, we got pretty good engines, but you weren't like you have to win. When I went and got in Sterling's car, he was leading the points or he might have just fallen out of the lead, but like he'd won some races, right? And it was legitimately like getting in one of the best cars, and that was nerve-wracking to me. And so we ran Talladega. I had never made a green flag pit stop in my life, and that race ran caution-free. So we ran the entire race. Entire race caution-free. There wasn't a caution. And I ran. I mean, the car was super fast. I ran really well and ran out of gas on I think one. I don't know if it was the last stop or next to last of it, but ran out of gas. And I don't remember where I finished. And I remember everybody was pretty excited. And I told them, I was like, hey, I just want you to know, I'm like, we're going to Charlotte next week. If I had to pick my worst track, that's it. Like, there's no. I'm pretty intimidated by it. I struggle there. It's just not a good track for me. And Glover. I loved Tony Glover. He just had these little mannerisms and things he would say, and he would make you feel at home. And he's like, little buddy, it'd be all right. He's like, he said, we got a really good setup for that track. Sterling dominated it in the spring. I don't know what it was, but he's like, little buddy, it'd be just fine. Don't worry. And I was like, okay, So we go to Charlotte, and I had never driven a Cup car I'd only been at Speedway, right? At a super Speedway. And I remember leaving the pits in qualifying trim on Friday, and I exit turn 2, and you're in second gear, and I started rolling in the throttle, and the throttle pedal felt about this long. And I got about this much of it down, and I was like, shit, this thing is fast. I'm like, I'm not even wide open yet. And I shifted to third, and I'm like, oh my God, I still have a whole nother gear to go. And my eyes were the size of the tires. I get to fourth gear, and I miss turn 3, bouncing up the track, and I make it to mock run, right? They sent me out in qualifying trim the first time. Come in, they cool it down, and Glove comes down to the window, because it was an interesting dynamic, because Lee McCall was a crew chief, but Glover kind of made the calls. They kind of worked it together, and he's like, hey, we're going to cool it down, blah, 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 go make you another run. I go out, and I think I was 40th on the sheet of this. And I remember it rained out qualifying. It rained. And I remember Glover after practice is like, little buddy, I think you might have been honest with me before we got to Charlotte. He's like, kind of struggle here, huh? And I'm like, yeah, Glove. I'm like, I told you it's a really hard track for me. And I think it was him or somebody on the team was like, you can't drive through the bump in turn 3. And in my mind, I'm like, what bump? I don't even know what the hell they're talking about. There's a bump? And so they took me on top of the truck, and they pointed to turn 3, and there was a little patch, and they're like, you're hitting that. You can't hit that bump. You got to stay out later. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, okay. I don't even know that I've ever seen that bump on the racetrack. And I definitely didn't see it in that Cup car, because I was going 4,000 miles an hour, right? So it rains out qualifying. The next day we go in, and the way the schedule was then, I don't know why, but we did practice for the Busch car, or maybe we just started the Busch race. And I left the pits, and I'm like, this thing's a turd. I'm like, this has no power. And I got to turn 3, and I'm like, oh, I see the bump right there. And I went around it. And I don't remember where I started in the Busch race, but I was running third. Maybe one of my best Busch races ever. And I'm like, I'm pretty fast all of a sudden, right? And I think I blew up in the Busch race. But I'm like, oh my God, I can see that bump now, because things slowed down for me, right? I went from 4,000 miles an hour to kind of normal speed, and all of a sudden I could see things. Well, we started the Cup race the next day. And I'm like, I'm pretty fast, because I'm driving around this bump, and our car's fast. And I don't remember how we cycled to the front, but all of a sudden it just kind of all clicked for me. And I'd never won a truck race. I'd never won a Busch race. And I just remember I'm leading the Cup race, and we had to do another green flag pit stop. And I'm like, oh my God, it's just all surreal, all this moment that's getting ready to happen. I'm like, I can't believe it. And I will never forget crossing the start finish line and Glover coming on the radio, and he's like, all right, little buddy, next one back start finish line's a winner. And I'm like, oh my God, just don't mess it up. And Bobby Labonte had started to catch me, but I'm like, he's not gonna pass me. I know he's not gonna pass me. And when that race was over, I'd never got to do a burnout, and I'd watched all these people do burnouts, and I'm like, I cannot wait to get to do a burnout. And not only a burnout at Charlotte on the front stretch. And it was this magical night because there was no wind. And so I started doing this burnout, and I couldn't see, and I've got this picture at home, the smoke just kind of stayed there. And it was just for me, there's few things that you remember in life throughout your life, but there's some things that are just crystal clear, and that's one of those for me. Yeah.
Huh. Do you ever rewatch those races? When was the last time you would
tell the truth?
Because I do TV, they replay some of those moments for me. And they do it not telling me they're going to do it to get that reaction from you. so I have seen those, and like Bobby and I maybe did a hub together, and they replayed that moment, and it's kind of fun now to like look back with him and see all that. But it's funny because like what I remember out of my eyes isn't sometimes what I see on the TV. Like I'm like, well, that's not how I remember it, and I know that that's actually how it happened, but that's not always how I saw it out of my eyes.
Yeah.